Arturo Urena, welcome to the Tokyo Living Podcast.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Perhaps if you can give the listeners and viewers a bit of background on yourself, both on your capoeira background and just your background in Japan.
Okay, well, I started capoeira at the age of 17 and basically never looked back. Spent some time in Brazil, conversationally fluent, I guess. I read and write also in Portuguese. Born and raised Mexican mother in South San Diego, literally right a stone's throw from the border
Okay.
between San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico. So native Spanish speaker also. Born in America, so I'm native American, native English speaker, sorry, and been in Japan since 1999, where I came to participate in some events, fell in love with what I was doing here, and stayed.
Awesome. And many of the listeners and viewers will be familiar with capoeira, but for those who aren't, what actually is capoeira? How would you describe it to people who are unfamiliar?
Yeah, well, like most things, everyone has their take on it.
Yeah.
Personally, I first would say, I do have a master's degree in Latin American studies focused on capoeira,
Oh,
was
wow.
my study, that's what I focused on. And then I also got a second master's degree here at Waseda on the importation and globalization of Afro-Brazilian popular arts. So what I'm going to
Wow.
say is based on my research of what I see as not only a person involved since a very young age on the ground level of the oral traditions, but also on the academic research.
Yeah, sure.
So we all know that, Brazil received something like 90% of all the slaves, like 80% of all the slaves that went into the New World went to Brazil or through the port of Bahia, which is now sometimes referred to as the Black Rome.
Okay.
And with all these cultural manifestations that were brought in to Brazil over, 400 years, basically capoeira was born from that.
Mm.
People try to say that capoeira is from Africa. We have aspects of it, but it's not completely African because as there's nothing exactly like it or even similar in Africa. So capoeira was some people say it's a dance, it's a martial arts. Personally, I think capoeira is what it is. Capoeira, the tradition of capoeira cannot be separated into different things. Like it's a martial arts, it's a dance, it's music, it all grew together
Mm.
because of cultural background, right? They don't separate the music from the art. And it makes sense if you've ever done any kind of martial arts or boxing, people can understand that, you need to build rhythm and flow.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
music has been, from the beginning, part of that. Capoeira was outlawed as it was practiced by generally people who were downtrodden or from the lower classes. And finally, in about the 1920s, it became legitimized by Getulio Vargas, the president of Brazil. And today, capoeira has grown all over the world. It's attempting to become an Olympic sport.
Mm.
And I guess the closest thing you could think about is that, for example, breakdance was highly influenced by the capoeira players in the early 70s in New York. So,
Mm.
for example, head spin, hand spin, all those acrobatical things. Sorry about the background. Give me a second for it to pass. And all those aspects, such as you see in breakdancing. If you look at the breakdancing shuffle, I personally think it's what it looks like when a person starts capoeira the first day with our basic step called the jinga.
It is.
So
Yeah.
capoeira has been influenced by that, and of course by it's primarily a kicking art.
Mm.
Although we do use our heads, our elbows, hands, and people don't generally use that in the capoeira game because it escalates the violence, but it does have a strong martial arts aspect, but it also just a strong cultural and musical aspect.
Yeah, awesome. That's a fantastic I guess synopsis of the history and yeah, very cool. So I guess how much of it I guess in the early stages was sort of combat influenced? I know when you look at the history of karate in Okinawa, the kata that we practiced evolved out of the fact that people were trying to hide their practice of combat through what is also like a bit of a dance or a routine, and that is how our kata was developed. Is it a similar sort of thing with capoeira? in that, people were hiding combat techniques in the form of dance, or was it originally more from the dance perspective that then started to incorporate combat techniques? Or how did it sort of develop in that way?
It's a super interesting question because, as we don't have any really written accounts of how the capoeira players back in the day practiced the art. For example, I have a good friend who's a longtime master of capoeira, and he says we have I think you guys call it the inside crescent kick, the kick going inside. Well, we call that a meia lua de frente, and that friend had said the reason it was called that was because, for example, slaves or people would turn up with these half moon shapes from the ankle bruises.
Okay.
So that would be that's why it's called the meia lua. But at the same time, what we're talking about, capoeira was also seen practiced in the marketplaces and the slave quarters. And even at that time, you wouldn't really want to be fighting everybody all the time, the people you have to do business with. So was it originally a martial art, or was it originally hiding the martial arts in the dance, or was it dance moves that were, we all have arms and legs, so it can incorporate into that. So it's really difficult to say what it was first. I personally think that capoeira is just a human experience. For example, a person who grows up and sees a couple people punching and kicking, and they start to develop their own system, their own way of doing things, and trial and error over 400 years basically gave us what we have today. Now, today, we have people who focus on capoeira as a martial arts, as we see like in MMA. And at the same time, we have people who focus on the cultural or the traditional. I don't want to say traditional, but the ethnic. But that's more for so cultural anthropology and understanding what they want to classify it as. Personally, today, I was raised with capoeira that when the capoeira game starts, you're ready for any aspect of it.
Yeah.
I would say it's similar to, for example, are you going to do the kata with two people at one time, where you don't really hit each other and there's respect and you're showing it, versus where people want to really, get aggressive with it.
Yeah.
So you're raised to do both. I think like any martial arts, because you have to have a balance, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned the sports side too, which I think within a lot of I think most martial arts, there is more the traditional side and then a sporting side. How has capoeira evolved as a sport? And you said that there's a push towards it being an Olympic sport. And what does a capoeira match look like? Obviously, they're not making contact and it's not actual combat. How is it scored? And how is the sport side sort of formulated?
I think it's really difficult. For example, let's say you have two people doing, in one aspect, you have people who they judge by points. Like, for example, when you actually hit someone, when you take someone down, a kick versus a punch. There's so many different rules for capoeira around the world right now. One of the big ones being in Azerbaijan every year that I see a lot on YouTube. A lot of well-known masters go that I know, and they become judges. Also, the one in Brazil that Red Bull has been doing for the last few years, which is also incredible. The thing with capoeira, because it's so many different aspects to it, I think it comes down to what we were just talking about. If you're going to have a competition focused on the martial arts, then it's going to be a point-based system. Are you going to have one based on kata, for example, doing a routine versus the flow and interchange and exchange between two players? So it's really difficult, I think, to do sports capoeira, and it's still evolving. I think we'll see where that goes within the next 5 to 10 years, especially post COVID, as people want to get back into social contact and competition and all those things. We do see a lot of the capoeira now being used, like movements, and capoeira players in Brazil and outside using it in MMA.
Yeah,
with different levels of success. I'm not a big follower of that every day, but I do see what friends send me. To judge capoeira, the thing with capoeira, because it's also such a cultural aspect of it, like music and singing and the playfulness of it. So I think to become not legitimate, but to become more organized, it's going to have to decide, will it be a martial arts Will it be, are we going to focus on the point system, on the elegant system? Because I always thought it was difficult to, there were tournaments that tried to do, for example, half figure skating type rules and gymnastics and half point system.
Mm.
But most of the early competitions in Brazil, especially a couple that I was able to attend, or the United States, always ended up being resolved outside with egos. So it's hard to, really quantify capoeira as it is. So if I do a backflip, is that more valuable versus you doing a roundhouse kick?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think it's really difficult, and they're gonna have to decide on which level they're gonna want to score the capoeira. But with every time they move away from capoeira towards the sports side, they're also going to lose a lot, I think, of the cultural and the beauty of capoeira that's dynamic and cultural and musical. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think I learned when I was in grad school, I took a MBA course in marketing, and some people like McDonald's, some people like Burger King, and people are always going to go to one camp or the other. Some people are going to be hardcore traditional Okinawa karate kata, and some people are going to be like, hey, how do we put it in MMA?
Yeah.
I don't think either one is wrong. Just for capoeira being so eclectic, it's going to take a time for them to really solidify world rules, because every group seems to have a little different way of like judging.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And so when you saw capoeira for the first time as a 17-year-old, what got you hooked?
It's just like, I mean, you can see me just lighting up right
Yeah.
now. I grew up, my mother comes from Veracruz, Mexico, and she was always into dance and flamenco, salsa, all the stereotypical Latin things. And I had grown up with that in my house every weekend. Saturdays when there was only one Spanish-speaking channel in San Diego. Whoever remembers that has to be my generation, because now there's like 5,000. But there was like the old Mexican lucha libre videos that I used to watch when I was a kid in black and white. And then there was always these old like mariachi movies and these movies of salsa and music. And my mom would come here dance with me. So from a young age, I was very in tune with, by fire and by not having a choice, to Latin music. Then as a child, also, I grew up in South San Diego, in a barrio, which is kind of a ghetto area of South San Diego. And it was rough. So they had classes at the local Y, karate, taekwondo, all the different things. And I always took different things. I was really intrigued by martial arts. And even after I met capoeira, I still, practiced the other arts, but slowly but surely there was an attraction to a Latin American martial arts, something that, just hit me on a more base level. Most people who train capoeira say there's something different about it.
Yeah.
And like I said, everybody has their own way of doing things. I know a lot of guys who train kickboxing, karate, and they play hip hop music or reggae music. It's really what you got to find what matches you. But the first time I heard capoeira music and an instrument we call the berimbau, which is just the roots go back 7,000 years in human history, one of the first instruments. It just hits you on a very primitive and tribal level. And I was hooked from the first day.
Yeah.
Because it brought these two aspects of that I felt Latin swing and martial arts, two things that I'd loved my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you, by the time you were in university, you had actually decided to try and include that as part of your university studies.
Well, it was funny because we're a little bit older now. There's a lot of social, cultural dynamic change in the United States over the last 10 years. So people always ask me, like my kids will ask me, in America, is it like this? I go, maybe my daughter, I said, I've been here 20 years. I can't really tell you what it's like. I can tell you what I've heard. Yeah. I'm more qualified to talk about contemporary Japanese culture than contemporary American culture, I feel.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's just the attraction of the art itself is just
Yeah.
overwhelmingly dynamic, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so it wasn't necessarily at that stage, you weren't sort of studying the history of capoeira with, you know, a potential career in mind. It was just a passion and interest of
No,
yours.
because I mean, at that time, I mean, I can tell some stories here. I'm a very, like, I think about 10 years ago, I graduated as the level we call mestre, master in capoeira. And it was a very profound and enlightening experience. I'm very straightforward with everybody. I know now everybody is very careful about feelings and this and that. And I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about what I saw and my perceptions.
Mm.
And I hope people can make their own judges. But for example, when I went to college, I was the first one in my whole neighborhood that I knew went to college.
Mm.
And at that time, we were brainwashed. Just, you know, oh, you're a minority, go to college. You'll be able to have success, do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. So being Mexican American, I was not only intrigued, but I actually started studying undergrad was Latino and Hispanic studies and political science. I actually had aspirations for a political career when I was a kid. But so I studied a lot of Latin American things, and the capoeira was always in the background. And it wasn't until after I graduated and worked a few years that I realized capoeira is what I wanted to do. Even though I had, a degree, several degrees, it was my dream. So when I had the opportunity to come to Japan, I did that. Although I did study Latino and Hispanic studies, it wasn't the career that I was preparing for.
Yeah, sure.
It came much later in life.
Yeah, yeah. And then you said it was capoeira events that initially brought you out to Japan?
Yeah, well, so I had finished my, I'll take it back. So I didn't get my first master's at San Diego State. I did all but my thesis.
Okay.
I finished all the coursework, and it's back when everybody still used Hotmail, and I thought I could do it over the internet. And then 2 of my chairs had quit within 6 months after I left San Diego. Right. And so I had 3 chairs, and I was just like, okay, I'll do it next year. I'll submit my thesis, and I never did. So that's why I ended up going back here at Waseda to get my master's. So I'm all but thesis on a Latin American master's degree from San Diego State and a full master's degree here at Waseda. I got invited to come here to do some shows. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I finished my course study. I wanted to come back to Asia. I was in Korea a couple years before that. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity. A friend of mine said, there was still that image of the Japanese bubble.
Yeah, sure.
Even way into the late 90s, go to Japan, it's easy, get an English teaching job. It's easy. You'll get a visa, then you can start teaching capoeira, blah, 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 blah. You remember how the whole shtick was, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's what brought me out here. And I fell in love with my students and eventually met my wife. And now I'm here, 22, 23 years later.
Yeah. And did you start teaching straight away, or were you training with another group, or what did you practice?
No, it's really interesting. I think this is where it becomes a little bit interesting. We all have a take and understanding of anyone who's been long-term in Japan, how, like I said, my master's at Waseda was the importation and globalization of popular Afro-Brazilian arts into Japan. So a lot of research and discussions about how Japan imports. So I say Japan because I don't want to say people, because I think people are different no matter where you go. And the first group of capoeira people who came who started doing capoeira in Japan, well, I'll say Tokyo, were really break dancers who went to Brazil for special courses.
Okay.
Spent a lot of money and then came back with like teacher's degrees.
Okay.
We've seen that with like people who went to Thailand for 1 week yoga course, came back and they're a teacher.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm saying that's what it was. Anyone, you're laughing because you've seen that.
Yeah.
I went to America for an intense physio, therapist course. A week later, I have the same degree as you from some unknown college. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to get into whether what people are doing are right and wrong, but I came from a more like martial arts and more profound I feel, Afro-Brazilian cultural experience in capoeira. So when I first came here, I get here on the Friday with the intention of like, I'm going to start teaching capoeira and do some shows. And I got here on the Friday. Monday, I went to go check out this group, and it was huge. There was like 60 people in one of those big old buka kaikans, the big like rental places. And people were doing backflips. And I was like, and I saw the teacher, and he had a red belt. And I was like, wait a minute, I know this group. That's a 15-year minimum belt in Bahia, Brazil. And the guy comes up to me, and not really in a humble way. And I tell the story, and people say, well, maybe he didn't understand. Look, it's not my point to understand how Japanese are doing their thing. This is capoeira. There is basic cultural rules. Same as if a foreigner does karate, Japanese expect them to have basic Japanese cultural understanding. When culture, as several writers write, globalization and cultural currency, then people don't understand that they're missing a lot of the experience and time put in. And I started playing with this instructor, and accidentally smashed his nose by accident. And I look over, and I'm like, these guys are all going to jump me, because in Brazil, if you do what I think they call it dojo arashi, like attack a dojo. Which I wasn't doing, just the quality wasn't there at the time. And I wasn't that good at the time. Just my belt was, I think, right. His belt was here, but his quality was like, and that did create a lot of animosity towards a lot of the groups here in the city. And I decided, okay, I'm just going to do my own thing. But I look over, and he's sitting there with somebody holding a tissue over his nose. And I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. He's like, okay. So that was my first weekend experience, and I came to teach capoeira. So it was actually a little bit disheartening, because I thought, wow, it's already massive here. But everybody in Brazil that I knew, no one had any idea that it was capoeira in Japan. Because everything was in Japanese and very connected to their group. So I don't want to say cultural appropriation. I don't want to say exploitation. I don't want to say that, because I'm no authority on that either. But there is a base level. I mean, I'm gonna get in trouble for this, but they still do blackface here, right? So anyone who wants to debate cultural anthropology and race relations, I'm always up for it. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I don't approve of it. Because it always comes back to bite you. You can't say you're an eighth Dan, in love with Japan, Japanese culture, come here and can't order a cup of coffee in Japanese. So people won't take you as serious. People who have put in the time. I'm talking about people putting in the time versus not. But that's basically was my first experience. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to teach capoeira. 100% involved. I was lucky enough to meet a lot of the Brazilian musicians in the artist community here. They really influenced me musically. I've put out about 5 CDs. And they it's a very tight-knit artistic community, so I've been very lucky to be a part of that. And it just went from there. We grew. Now I have about kid students, about 20 adult students. And I've solidified my little community here.
And for those watching the video version of this, you can see your gym behind you. Looks like an amazing facility. How long have you had that current location?
We started in 2003. So we're going on to our 20th year next year. It's been a fantastic experience. A lot of learning, a lot of dedication, and staying the course.
And what do you think are some of the main sort of benefits of people practicing capoeira? Compared to other martial arts or other sports, or even other arts, music, and things like that. Obviously, it's a combination of all of those. But what do you see as the real benefits, and what do you see your students really getting out of the practice?
It's interesting, because no matter what I talk about capoeira, I'm always going to hit it from my strong base as a cultural anthropologist trained. One of the biggest things that we see here is that capoeira really has an energy, that Brazilian, we call axé, that energy, that ki, that just exuberant and passionate energy. And a lot of the people who come to capoeira are really attracted to that. The same as the people who go to samba, people who go to salsa, they really like that, energy that's just amazing.
Yeah.
And beyond that, capoeira is really challenging on many different levels. You have to become a percussionist, a singer, acrobatic person. You have to become, a fighter a little bit. You can gauge as you learn capoeira which ones. Yeah. And it's rare to see people who do it all. Tend to be more the hardcore people. And capoeira, besides flexibility, positive energy.
Yeah.
But like anywhere, if you have a good community, that creates the positive energy, because like anything, we also have bad apples everywhere. So
yeah.
Flexibility, endurance, people build confidence, especially if they're into acrobatics, because I've done workshops. Like next time I'm in, I'll show you how to do a handspin. It's pretty easy. And a lot of people are, like I said, are attracted to the cultural, but also I think a lot of people are really attracted to the energy, because there's many martial arts in the world. But what attracts people to capoeira is really that, I think, that Latin feeling, or that Brazilian feeling that we see. That's very open and friendly, amigo, friend kind of attitude. So yes, capoeira can be used as a form of self-defense, because anyone who's been in a street fight knows that there's no rules or anything. It's basically, if you can kick the guy and run, do it. So there is that martial arts aspect. There's the aggressive play that you can do. You can play hard capoeira, try to knock someone out, at the end of the day, walk away and not be enemies in a bad mood.
Yeah.
The physical, the flexibility is incredibly demanding. We're always training. And like I've mentioned to you before, I have to constantly be like doing handstands and just to maintain my upside down core strength.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of physical demands of capoeira that I don't see in most martial arts. Plus, you have to learn the musical, which people really like also.
Yeah. And you mentioned community there. I understand you do quite a lot of community events, and some of that relating back to Brazil as well. Perhaps if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, as I can only speak for myself as an American coming here. I'm raised with that. Originally, I thought we were going to make an NPO, just like we do in the United States, and I'd be able to get, government support. And then I realized when I came to Japan that it doesn't really exist. So although this is my own private, like one-person business, I do run it as an NPO a lot of times. Okay. So over the last 20 years, my wife and I sat down about it right during the middle of COVID, and we were just going over all the volunteer, all the donations, all the parties we made to support. We supported Capoeira, a very good kids program of education in the northeast of Brazil for many years. Okay. We've donated time, energy, resources, easily over 20 years, over $20,000 or $30,000 to various charities and performances and different events, and in value or in actually monetary donations. And a lot of that has come because I've been able to organize the people, my students, past, present, and they'll come for events. For example, I say, okay, we're going to do this charity event for the kids in Brazil. I'm always surprised how many people are happily come out. And a lot of people say, well, Japanese don't really have the culture of charity, of getting involved in this. And I think, for at least for my community, I've been able to kind of show them and expose them to that and to the benefits doing that. So we've got a nice little network of people who are involved internationally and locally in many of the charity projects I do. For example, helping the arts projects, donating to exhibitions in Brazil, donating to retirement funds for old masters of capoeira in Brazil, participating in events internationally by donating my time, my flight, my expenses as part of that to raise money for other events. And those kind of things. So I'm very into making sure that what Capoeira has given to me, I can also give back to the community.
Oh, it's a fantastic story, and it looks like you've got a fantastic operation, amazing facility, and doing some great things. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, we'll put all your links in the show notes. But yeah, do you have a website, socials, and then also? Are your events that you run, are they open to the public? Do you do sort of performance type events where people can maybe if they don't necessarily want to not willing to sort of jump in and try the art, but just have a look at it and see what it looks like for those who haven't seen it? Are there opportunities for people to do that?
Oh yeah, I'm really into not perfectly, but I really believe in social media. For example, you can go to my Instagram, mestre sucuri capoeira, MESTRE on Instagram. I'm constantly putting up stuff, especially about how awesome my kids are, my adult students are. I record things for the community. I talk about the responsibilities of being a capoeira master, as I'm hoping to elevate that culture even higher. And I have a YouTube under the same name. Most importantly, we have capoeira.jp, which we've had forever, which is really great because it's so easy to remember.
Yes.
During COVID, I felt I was really lucky and blessed, which really also reinvigorated me to follow my passion here. Many of my friends internationally lost their schools. They lost their classes because, you remember how hard that was.
Yeah.
And I went from about 30 kids to about 80 kids now.
Wow.
And I kept thinking, why? And my wife looks over at me and goes, because you're trusted by the community. Because no matter what you do, and she said, reminding me of something that I'd said years ago to her, the difference between me and a complainer is I don't complain. I criticize and try to make better. That makes me, maybe it makes me stronger and more responsible for my own actions. But there's a lot of people say, oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. Oh, they do this wrong. That does this wrong. I don't do that. I say, look, I don't agree with that. And this is how I'm going to improve it.
Yeah.
So that's why even if I take a hard stance, my whole community comes behind me, which I'm blessed with. And it's very important that we as foreigners, especially here in Japan, I feel, because this is my ground zero. This is where I am. So this is where I'm going to keep working hard until I can't do it anymore. I'm very dedicated to what I do. So if people want to check out any of our stuff, I'm constantly putting it up there. One of the big things post-Corona also is because we lost a lot of our events, which help support the Academia. My school is, I started my own t-shirt brand, which I'll be launching next month. And all the proceeds go towards all my community projects. For example, I want to do a localized Brazilian Day here or International Latin Day for my local community because it's mostly families in this area. And I want to be able to do more stuff online. I want to be able to produce more music. And my new brand, it's called BOA. And there's a one after that. If you go to Instagram, it's just starting. Give me a month.
Okay.
I'm about to ramp up and get it ready for Christmas.
Yep.
So all the proceeds from that go towards what I do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I remember when I was a kid in America, we used to sell chocolate bars for, fundraising.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm selling, original t-shirts design. Many of my friends or students over 20 years have been artists, and they're all donating artwork to me that I have too much right now.
Oh, awesome.
I've got some amazing Japanese prints coming up, some really cool Latin inspired, just everything. So we'll be doing that. And I hope people will follow that also. And even if people want to come out and see me, they can see me on Instagram, or I put out the events and everybody is welcome. Nothing makes me more happy than when someone says, I saw you on that podcast.
Yeah.
And I came to check you out. That just really makes my day. And people don't understand that. To validate people who do things such as I do, the podcast, just when people say, hey, I saw it, it was nice.
Yeah. It's
really an amazing experience. I recommend anyone who hears this or sees this podcast, if they ever come into, if I'm lucky enough to meet you, just say hi and say you saw me here. And it just makes my day. So you can see us in upcoming events that we're starting to organize now, and you'll see that on Instagram.
Awesome. And we haven't also mentioned the location of your studio. Whereabouts are you located?
I'm literally between the Ebaramachi station on the Oimachi line and the Toei Asakusa line, Magome station. Okay. So we're in Magome, but we're like right between the two. It's pretty convenient. It's like I said, it's a very residential area. I think that's why from when I originally started teaching, where I had like 40 adults, I've gone to like 80 kids.
Yeah.
And giving them a really positive and healthy. We'll be having a big event on March 4th, which I haven't done in 4 years because of COVID. I'll be doing my kids and my baby capoeira live performance. We got a local theater. I love Japan about that they have all these theaters that we can use. And I will be doing that probably on Instagram Live. So if people want to tune into that, I'll be promoting that, and you can see what a lot of the kids do and just how amazing they are.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, urge everyone to check that out and check out your socials. And if you do have a chance to go and visit or watch one of the shows, I think it would be a great experience for everyone. So, Arturo, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always great.
Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to talk to other sort of martial artists from overseas that have done amazing things out here. And so, we appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
All right. You're welcome. See you.
Yeah, have a good one.